All right. Today's a big one. I feel like I haven't had a big conversation like this in a long time. A lot of my conversations lately have been short, scattered, reminiscent of the same stuff, which is about patience and discipline and relating to that because that's obviously something that I really need to figure out in my life. However, something else that's been on my mind recently, and I'm glad that I'm kind of getting it out right now, is discussing nature and nurture. Because I'm thinking about it in different contexts now than I was before, and it's like bringing up stuff that I'm just like, let's talk about that. Let's figure that out. I don't think it's something I can figure out, but I want to figure out my relationship with that topic, I guess, and what I really think about it, how I feel about it, and it's a good starting point because I don't think I've talked about it with people before, but I haven't really analyzed it in this way in a solo conversation, and it's a starting point, I say, because I think this is an idea or something that will evolve over time. I mean, it already has for me somewhat, but it's hard for me to tell because I haven't really pushed it in this manner before. So I don't really know how much time I've really spent on it and if there was a conclusion I came up with, you know what I mean? Like discussing with other people, I don't remember coming to this idea or arriving at a specific thought. Maybe I did, and I just don't remember, and that's part of the evolution too, I guess. Not remembering and then having the conversation thinking that I didn't have a solution or a resolution last time, and I really did. Anyway, nature versus nurture. So, the new context that I'm talking about is having kids in the life. That is a new thing, and it's been on my mind because I've been thinking about how these children do not have my genes, right? It makes me think, I've thought about this before with myself and my parents, and I share their DNA, unlike the kids now that are in my life. I don't share DNA with them. However, there is this interesting gap. The circumstances in itself are interesting. Also, note complicated and complex because there's this aspect of okay, we know right out the window that whatever is in their nature, whatever parts of them that are in their nature are not coming from me and my nature, unless part of my nature is something that can be nurtured into them, if that makes sense. I don't even think that's where that was going to go, but that's a statement that makes sense to me. It would be from Randy and then the kids' respective biological donors. And that's already a topic that to me I'm it's one of those things you never know. So there's almost no point in having the conversation because I just don't know certain things. But I've thought about this with myself. So I thought about okay, well there's certain qualities and traits that I have, or attributes, personality, things that I don't think were nurtured into me because one, I had an absence of a father, yet I carry some of his traits that are very unique to him. I don't mean unique to him versus everyone on earth. I mean unique to him versus my mother or people that were living in the house. So, a stepdad. And I don't know where I got that from. If it wasn't, obviously it wasn't through spending time with him, because that wasn't a thing. And my mother does not carry those traits, and would not have passed them on to me either via nature or nurture. So that's what makes me believe in some, nature. Being, that there are certain things passed down through genetic. Again, did I do any research? No. But there's certain traits that could be passed down genetically, that would be mental, emotional, personality traits, not physical illnesses and disease and prone to things. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these other things. And it's like, well, why am I the way that I am? And how much can I pull myself out of that? Because that's another thing that people like to use as a scapegoat all the time. It's just annoying. I'm like, well, that's how I grew up, so that's why I am the way I am. And I'm like, if you were aware of that, you could change it. Like, if you were aware of the fact that this was something in your nurturing stages that you recognize as being like, oh, I grew up this way, and therefore I have that in me. If it's not something that you like, then you could rail against that. I mean, like, it's like living in an alcoholic home, or like a home with an alcoholic or two or whatever, and being like, well, that was my model, that was what was shown to me as the way to do things. But you could, once you recognize that maybe that's a coping mechanism that you, like, I'm sure that in your youth or in your nurturing stages, you weren't probably enjoying the effects of alcoholism on you. So you probably wouldn't want that for your kids if you were going to have kids, or you for yourself, for your own health. I'm sure that's not a benefit, to you, and you would see that as a detriment, but it comes as like, well, that's how I was raised, that's all I know. And like, when it becomes an awareness of that, you've already refuted any argument you would have had as to why you're relying on that as a crutch. If you're unaware of it being in your nurturing, you know what I mean, then that is a more plausible explanation for like it being part of your nurturing, I guess. Anyway, but there are certain things in me, certain impulses that I have, certain abilities or skills that I have that I believe have been transferred somewhat genetically through my biological donor, if you want to call him that. Simply because, again, they weren't things that I was picking up through any nurturing at home, and it's just coincidence that this is a thing that exists very strongly within this man, and exists somewhat strongly within me. And then I started to question myself on like, well, why weren't these other qualities nurtured into me? Because maybe there's so much nature in me in some areas that it did not allow for certain nurturing to take place. I think about my mother being an incredibly empathetic person, whereas my empathy is very specific and not as broad as hers, and that can lead to being perceived as incredibly selfish, especially if I'm comparing to her. I mean, there's a lot of things I don't really want to, give all that information out or whatever. But if I compare myself to my mother, I see the differences are huge in so many areas, in some very specific ones that are very strong, and I don't know why, right? Like, I do not, like, some people seem to come out as like carbon copies of one of their parents or both of their parents, and part of that, again, is probably both of those things, nature and nurture. But some people really seem to get a lot of nurture and can point to that, or like they're affected by the nurture part, and it translates well into how they are as an adult, and it can be traced back to, oh, well, these are the values and beliefs we had in my home, and those were instilled in me, and thus here I am, and I, value those things too. Not just because they were valued in my home, but because at a certain point, I believe as an adult, even before being an adult, I mean, I think these are things that you should have mental capabilities and stuff that you should have in your teens to look and analyze and realize, this isn't for me, this doesn't make any sense, or, hey, I really do want to adopt this strategy or this value because it makes sense and it does. Like, as a teen, you're starting to figure out what actually matters to you. It's not just, or shouldn't be, which, I mean, even for some adults, it just is that way. Like, well, that's how we do it, like, tradition for tradition's sake. But you should be, doing some critical thinking and figuring out if it actually makes sense for you or not. So, the nurturing is there to a degree, and then hopefully if someone's cognitively able enough, they analyze these things and they realize, like, oh, this is something that actually is beneficial to me, and I'm going to keep that. Like, purposely keeping maybe a tradition or value, and then the other ones that don't seem to fit with you anymore, you throw those away. And why do they not fit anymore? Because of other experiences you've had in your life. You are a different person. Despite the fact that you are a combination of DNA, you have traits that maybe neither of those people have. And that's the thing. That's another thing. Between my mom and my dad, or whatever, for the sake of just making the terminology what it is, an easier flow for the conversation, referring to my DNA donor as my dad. Yeah, so there are things that I find in myself that are incredibly strong characteristics that are not present in either of them. They also weren't nurtured into me. So there's a part of my nature, or seems to be, or they weren't nurtured into me at home. There we go. There's a specification I need to make. Because I believe that there are some things where I've talked about, being Canadian and being raised here with these traditions and values and whatever else, and maybe that I know that has nurtured and contributed, like through the school system, the public school system has somewhat carved out values that I still strongly cling to, and that is part of my nurturing, spending time in the school system and what other people value as important and whatever. But I mean, there's a lot of people that were born and raised in the same exact environment I was, people of color, minorities, and Caucasian folks and whatever else, that don't hold as much value on, let's just, for example, like British literature or like things like that for some reason it wasn't instilled in them, but it was instilled in me. And again, this is why it's a combination of nature and nurture for so many things. That was something that was nurtured into all of us in a way, yet I carry that torch higher than other people do, and that is just part of my nature, I think, that is doing that is responding to the nurture in a way that other people didn't. Because again, like, there are things that I have that I can't seem to find how it was nurtured. There were just things that I identified with, that I related to, that I found, and they hit home, yet it was not something that anyone else brought to me necessarily. I mean, if there are things like music and style of different things that I aesthetically enjoy, or certain values or certain ideas or whatever, I don't know, there's something in my nature that just isn't, it's just not present in either of my parents. Through genetics and DNA, those things just, they're not present in them, and I don't think they ever were. They're just not those people. Yet there's things that are in me that are very much not that. So I believe in a certain amount of nature that can be passed down, and also the fact that there's a certain amount of nature that is, because there's a combination of, DNA, it creates new traits that aren't maybe found in either of the DNA donors or your parents or whatever. And that's just an interesting thing to try and think about that and analyze that and figure out why you are the way you are sometimes. Again, you can, once you are aware and you recognize certain things, it is up to you to decide if those are good things or bad things, healthy things, positive, negative, whatever. And if they're not healthy things, you can change them. I firmly believe that there are so many things that once you are aware of them and you can analyze them, you can do the work to better yourself and change those things, even if you feel like they are a part of your nature. Once you're aware of that nature, I think you can do hard work to make attempts to change that. However, then we've got, you know what, I'm going to take this time to plug an amazing movie called Drive, which stars, I just forgot his name, Ryan, anyway, Gosling, there we go. Redeeming himself after, being a part of this horrible movie called The Notebook. Anyway, Drive, amazing movie. I actually just plugged it a little bit when I did a review for Trevor Something and the genre of music called retrowave or synthwave. Anyway, this movie is phenomenal, but there's one main lesson in it And it is the parable, I guess, or the fable of the scorpion and the frog, which is really important to bring up in this conversation of nature versus nurture, or just nature and nurture. And it's just this phenomenal thing that is present in the movie. That there's a scorpion just hanging out basically by a pond or a body of water, just chilling on the beach. And there's a frog. You know what, I told it wrong already. There's a frog who's just hanging out. And then there's a scorpion that comes upon the frog hanging out there on the beach. And the scorpion needs to get across. And the scorpion asks the frog, yo, I need a ride. I can't swim. Can you just take me across the body of water here, the stream or whatever, and so I can get to the other side? Like, I'd really appreciate it. And the frog says, well, no, you'll sting me. Like, that's what you do. And the scorpion says, no. Like, if I sting you, then we'll both drown. Because you would drown, and then I would drown because I'm on your back. Like, I'm not going to sting you, because that would be not beneficial for me. And the frog says, you're right. That's a very rational argument. That makes sense. Sure, hop on my back. I'll take you across. They get to the middle of the stream, and the scorpion stings the frog, and the frog, with his gasping, last dying breath, asks, why? Why did you do this thing that you said you would not do? Like, why did you sting me? Scorpion says, because I'm a scorpion. That is this heavy thing in the movie that's just a beautiful movie. You should watch it. It has some graphic violence from time to time, but it's beautiful. Everything about it. Everything about the movie, the cinematography, the lack of dialogue, the music, the soundtrack, the, presentation of layered, complex themes or theme. It's beautiful. Anyway, but that does bring this question of how much of your nature can you change? And I don't know, because there are things that I do recognize in myself that are not good things, and I feel like I've made attempts to change these things, and I don't want to say unsuccessfully, because one of those things is like, well, how hard did you really try? Then you question yourself on that. It's like, well, I guess I wasn't trying very hard, because I wasn't successful. I have not actually changed that thing enough for me to believe I've made progress. And it's like, well, is that because I'm incapable of changing that thing because it is in my nature? Or is that because I haven't really approached it from the right angle yet and I need to try something different? Questions I believe we should all be asking each other if we want to grow as people. And some people don't want to grow as people because they think that they're fantastic and they don't need to change anything at all. And those people are dumb. So, yeah. I want to bring this back to closer to the beginning as to why I've been thinking about this a lot, because I haven't been thinking about it a lot in the context of myself, which usually that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. But I've been thinking about myself in this context, or in this theme and topic, because the context that's been sparking this a lot, and I'm bringing it back to myself a bit, but it's really on my mind in the forefront way more when it comes to the kids, because this unique set of circumstances is that I have been around for a little over a year, and there's a child who is turning 9 in October, and a child who is turning 4 in January. And it's just this thing that that sometimes the modeling and the example and leadership that both Randy and I show has not seemed to get across yet in the nurturing, I guess, because it's definitely not a nature thing with me, but in the nurturing part, through example and teaching and conversation and experiences, whatever that we have tried to provide over the past year, what we would assume or call positive ones, that we're trying to instill certain values of work ethic and other things, that this older child isn't grasping those things, just not getting there. Part of it we have analyzed might be some of her nurturing with people that she spent time with that are incredibly negative influences. And those people have been removed from her life for long enough that we thought that perhaps maybe we could see some more positive changes that we're just not seeing. However, there is this question of nature. She has another set of genes in her that are not Randy's DNA. And that plays a role. How big of a role, I don't know. If it's a big enough role that it will completely annihilate any of the nurturing, or just the nurturing just won't matter. Because certain aspects of her character and personality are so strong from her nature that may be brought forth from this DNA donor, that might override any nurturing that we could do. I don't believe that. However, it might override some of it. That's the other thing too. There's, along with cognitive ability, I mean, there's only so much cognitive ability that one has. I believe that someone can cap at a certain level. I don't think that most of us, maybe I shouldn't say that. I believe that there's a real opportunity where people don't know where that cap is for them because they don't try. And I do believe that you're not stuck. It's not about being stuck somewhere. It's about the fact that, like, there's an opportunity to grow from where you are. I don't mean you where you start is where that's it, your cap is there. It's more of like, no, the cap might be here and you have opportunity to do this, but you like get here and you get stuck. And you're like, hey, I finished grade 12, or like I finished grade 8 and dropped out, and that's just where it's going to be. And it's not really anything to do with academics. That's just the first thing that came to my mind. But a lot of people just don't push themselves to learn new things. But some people aren't capable of doing a certain amount of critical thinking or analyzation or whatever else. So that's where all this is coming from, is that there has been some reflection and conversation about this in the home. And just being like, how, I don't know, it's just bringing it back to me, though, as well. Like, well, how much can I change? That doesn't mean that I shouldn't attempt to change, because I can't know how much I can change. Like, even if I'm attempting things that just don't seem to be working, to me that doesn't mean you give up and you just say, ah, no, that's my nature, can't do it. Because to me there's this sense of, well, I don't know. I don't know how much I can change. I haven't approached it from every possible angle yet. And I think some things you could try at a certain point in your life and it didn't work, and then a couple years later you might revisit that angle and then it does work. I mean, I don't know, it's like reading a book or watching a movie when you're a teenager and then you come back to it 10 years later and you're like, oh, I didn't get that the first time, like that's not what I was paying attention to, that didn't hit home, I understand it better now. But I think some things just click at certain times in your life. So I don't use this idea that maybe nature is overriding some of my own nurture. And I mean my own nurture being like how I nurture myself as an adult, how I put myself in positions and experiences, and what do I do with the results of those experiences, and my environment around me, the parts that I can't control, things like that. I don't want to say that my nature overrides those things or is overridden whatever, the things that I'm trying to change, because I just simply don't know. I don't know that. But I do know that nature plays a role. I just don't know how much we can change our nature. I don't think it's as rigid as the fable of the scorpion and the frog. However, I do believe that for some people, they choose not to change. However, there's also a portion of people that I don't think are cognitively able enough to change. I don't think that's something that they can do. It just depends. There's a lot of people who decide to change. When I call someone dumb or an idiot or whatever, this has been something that I've been struggling with actually for the last 4 years. These are obviously insults for someone's intelligence, but I've really come to this idea that, obviously, Some people don't have control. They're only cognitively able to a certain degree, and that's where it ends. And then, however, I do firmly believe some people choose to stay stuck there. They choose not to have an open mind. They choose to be stubborn. They choose not to exercise their mind and learn new things, etc. The problem is you just don't know who's who sometimes. A lot of the time, I'm finding. So when I call someone dumb or an idiot or whatever, it's usually because someone knew the right choice and they chose to make the wrong one. Lack of discipline, lack of willpower, selfishness. There's a lot of things and reasons why someone might do that, right? But those are the times, that's what I'm talking about when I'm like someone's an idiot or whatever else, because they know what the right choice is, but for whatever their selfish reasons are, they choose to not make it. And that can be incredibly detrimental sometimes, and sometimes it's just not a big deal. Anyway, I feel like that's where I'm wrapping up, because I come to the place where, how do we know how much nature has affected us? How do we know how much of our nature can be altered, can be built upon, can be changed, evolved? And the same thing with our nurture. Like, I really think that our nature and our nurture are very strong forces in us that we do have to reflect on, and those experiences have to be challenged for us to grow. And we pick and choose what makes sense to us at the time. But again, that's what makes sense to us at the time that we challenge it. Not what makes sense to us at the time because we've never challenged it. That is how people stay stuck. That is how people that have potential squander potential to be better people, because they make a choice to not do any reflecting. And some people just don't have it in their nature because their cognitive ability to do any reflection. I believe that that's simply a thing that some people just don't have. They don't have the ability to do critical thinking, which is unfortunate, because people of certain cognitive ability at times, you could just say that person is simple, but they're super positive and influential, happy, they bring joy and good things to this earth. But then there's people that are simple that are incredibly destructive, that might have talents in other areas like being really charismatic, yet they are incredibly narcissistic. They choose to make the wrong choices for selfish gain. Maybe they don't have whatever it is that would give them the opportunity to do critical thinking. Maybe they don't have that gene. Maybe that's not in their DNA. And unfortunately, we judge people usually by their actions, but then we have to go back and say, well, why did someone make that choice? Is it because that's all they know, that's their nurturing, or is it in their nature that they can't even change it? Because cognitive ability plays a huge role in why people make choices, but it also plays a huge role in how we judge and perceive people who make certain choices. Anyway, I feel like I'm getting into another topic here, but I really enjoyed having this conversation today. It's tough in any circumstance when you really start challenging and thinking of these things. Again, sometimes I feel like, what's the point in thinking about stuff that we will not come to a resolution about? We don't know the answers. We can't figure it out. But when it comes to this one, I do believe it's worth doing that dirty work and digging within yourself to analyze these things, because it will make you think of why you do what you do. And if you're thinking about why you do what you do, you might make some changes. I hope that people will. With that, we'll see you on another time.